How to Create a Glitch, Monologues. Season 2, Episode 1. This is the first episode of Season 2 of the Monologues in How to Create a Glitch in the Matrix. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about how emotional calibration, as introduced in the last episode of the first season of Monologues, how emotional calibration works and what the purpose of it is. So, to start out, I'd like to indicate that there's two ways of looking at the process of emotional calibration and the use of trends in style and media consumption choices to calibrate the population to a particular period in history where there were specific ideological struggles and the recapitulation of those ideological and historical trends in the more recent era. So, the first way to look at it is from a passive standpoint. And as I indicated in the last episode of Season 1 of the Monologues, I do not believe that the calibration of the population is a passive process. I believe it's directed as such. Since I believe it's directed, I believe that it is directed for a purpose. So that's the first kind of point I'd like to get across. The emotional calibration of the population is a directed process, and it's directed for a specific purpose. So, what is that purpose? The purpose of reintroducing certain ideological conflicts in the population periodically through the emotional calibration of styles and media choices and consumption choices is for the purposes of eliminating underlying currents of social tension. So, in other words, basically, what I'm suggesting is periodically the system builds up a certain amount of entropy, and this entropy manifests as social tension within the context of social exchanges or socialization. So there has to be a way to eliminate this social tension, this entropy within the system. So, in order to do that, the programming of the system is designed to reintroduce certain ideological conflicts periodically and direct that social tension or entropy into that ideological conflict. Then over time, and by the mechanism of social dialogue, is gradually eliminated and the social tension dissipates. Now, one of the key steps for this process to work is that the sources of entropy, those who are causing issues in the system, those who are building up entropy in the system, those who are creating social tension, they have to be redirected, and they have to be redirected carefully towards one of two positions in an ideological conflict. The central ideological conflicts of a given era thus manifest as the gradual attribution to those causing social tension or entropy in the system, and therefore the release of that tension during a subsequent period of resolution in the narrative. So, the key point on an individual level, or the key step in order to make this whole process work, is that individuals have to be rationalized according to a specific categorical categorization which exists in the populace already, which is to say that ideological conflicts can only be recapitulated if individuals are properly categorized into the two classifications or more which describe the ideological conflict. What this means in practice is that individuals will find that if they create entropy in the system, they're going to be socialized to describe that entropy or that tension that they create into set categories which have been set aside for them, as set out in the emotionally calibrated ideological struggle identified and implemented through the emotional calibration of media and fashion. Now, it's also important to note on another line of thinking that oftentimes these stylistic changes or recapitulation are unconscious. That is, individuals will gravitate toward specific styles or consumption choices based upon the underlying programming of the system, oftentimes without their knowledge or express understanding that they're being directed towards it, and the principle by which this occurs is through their posture. Postural releases, and as explained in the previous season, postural release is what they do is they involve the consent or acquiescence of one individual to another and the mirroring of their behavior, posture and posing. This mirroring behavior created by postural releases eliminates tension. And so, when an individual mirrors another individual, oftentimes that will also include mirroring their styles and fashion and media consumption choices. So, in the process of giving in or consenting and thereby eliminating social tension, they're also acquiring an unconscious desire to mirror the other person's style choices or consent media consumption choices. So, this emotional calibration is built into the system as far as social tension is concerned and the essential nature of reality. Now the question becomes, how does one work against this process? Well, in the same way that one can create a glitch by artificially eliminating postural releases. One can also be mindful of one's stylistic choices and consumption choices, and when one is directed unconsciously to follow certain patterns as it pertains to style and media or consumption choices, one can willfully choose to reject those impulses and act in accordance with a particular era in history that one seeks to recapitulate. So, for example, let's say one seeks to recapitulate a specific style in the past 30 years for the purposes of identifying certain ideological struggles and bringing those out in society. One can choose to direct one's consumption choices into that pattern, with the aim of hopefully creating a trend among one's immediate social circle and family members. So, the imposition of certain techniques in the context of these discussions is helpful in hopefully creating a glitch in the matrix and working against the programming of the system for the purposes of undermining the natural progression of an orderly exchange. Anyway, that's the end of the first podcast of the second season of How to Create a Glitch in the Matrix Monologues. Thank you. Bye.